This is Roll Call for this edition of African Drums. The African drums are sounding.
Oh yeah, and then we together.
Very good evening to you and welcome to yet another edition of the African Drums. I'm David Hinds, sitting in for LC Harry. Tonight we have a special program for you. It is special because we are launching two important events. We're celebrating two important events. The first event is today's African Civilization Day. African Civilization Day. We are celebrating today. And secondly, we are launching this month the beginning of the International Decade of People of African Descent. As viewers would remember, just 2 or 3 years ago, the United Nations set aside a year, International Year of the People of African Descent, in which we purportedly were supposed to have highlighted the issues and problems arising out of centuries of enslavement. And now we are launching the decade, International Decade of the People of African Descent. And tonight here on African Drums, Cuffy250 would like to launch our own initiative in that direction by presenting to you, first of all, excerpts from a speech delivered by Sir Hilary Beckles, the former Vice-Chancellor, a principal of the University of the West Indies, now Vice-Chancellor of the University of the West Indies. And Sir Hilary Beckles has been at the forefront. In fact, he has been the leading voice in the drive for reparations for people of African descent for years of centuries of enslavement. Professor Beckles recently, on December 10th last, addressed the United Nations General Assembly. The United Nations General Assembly. Those of us who have been following the news would know that he, sometimes last year, addressed the British House of Commons, which is the British Parliament, on the issue of reparations. And then on December the 10th, he went before the General Assembly. And the General Assembly of the United Nations is the assembly of all of the nations of the world who are members of the United Nations. It was quite a moment, and so his address is quite an important address. And tonight, we want to share excerpts from that address with you, and we will then have a discussion after. With me to do that are three members of Cuffy250. I will start from my far left, the chairman of Cuffy250, Mr. Royston Peters. Dr. Margaret Garvey is in the middle. She is a Cuffy250 member and an expert on Black Studies. She taught Black Studies in the United States and is part of Cuffy250 here. And you would not believe it, my next guest is someone who is a new face to television, Miss Eve Blackman, member of Cuffy250. Sisters and brother, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's nice to have you here. Eve, since you're the new voice here, let's start with you reading the first excerpt from Professor Beckles' speech.
Thank you, David. Professor Beckles said, critically, we are assembled here in this World Forum to choose. We are at the crossroads and we seek the guidance of Legba, African god of the intersection, to provide the spiritual content of our choice. The importance of this understanding should not be understated in any way. We are at the dawn of this 21st century, and once again, humanity struggles to come to terms with the legacies of the crimes committed against his African family. Aspects of these legacies are as alive today as they were 2 centuries ago. Everywhere that African enchainment and enslavement became the basis of societies and economies, their descendants today cannot assume the human right to breathe the air of freedom and justice. Plantation slave drivers and overseers have been replaced by public prosecutors and militarized police, and the human right to life denied Africans during the 400 years of the barbarity called chattel slavery continues to be contested. The racism that informs that contestation defines and distorts the primary social relations of humanity. In 1781, the English law lord Judge Mansfield, in an effort to purge African enslavement from his homeland and to confine its vulgarity to the colonies, insisted that his country folks at home should breathe neither the foul air of slavery nor endure the stench of its stain. Today, 233 years later, millions of African descendants are still breathing the foul air that blows from the stench of slavery in their quest to inhale the free air of justice and democracy. They are seized by the throat and their breath taken away in a fashion reminiscent of centuries ago. I can't breathe has now become the universal ideology of the African diaspora, most vocal in the USA, where African descendants are brutally policed in their pursuit of social justice, economic enfranchisement, and existential dignity. No longer do we have to watch the construction in movies of the destruction of the black life, nor journey to the journals of history to see and read of this deadly mentality, bred in slavery, legally at work, officially sanctioned, and in triumphant celebration. We see it every day in our streets as they go about their daily business. Humanity cries for the victims of these crimes. We cry out for humanity's descent, deeper and deeper into the despair of the dungeon that is the legacy of African enslavement, the greatest crime against it in and before modernity.
There has been a steadfast refusal by the beneficiaries of these crimes to formally recognize their nature and nurture. It is this refusal of recognition that drives the legacies of these crimes into our social realities and facilitates life-taking policing in our communities. This denial stands undiminished in the face of a mountain of evidence that cries out for ownership, responsibility, and accountability. Denial and silence are now the mother and father of a new generation of hate crimes, squeezing black life from already impaired lungs. They are today's breath takers, as hate and greed were in the earlier times. But the names on the cold, stone-like face of silence and denial must be known and called to account. Portugal continues to deny its slavery crimes, yet we know that this nation was the largest shippers of enchained African bodies across the Atlantic. To Portugal, we say, rise to your responsibility. Great Britain denies, yet we know that it was the greatest profit maximizers and extractor investor in African slavery. To Great Britain, we say, rise to your responsibility. France denies, yet we know that it fought the bloodiest war of all to prevent enslaved blacks from breathing the air of liberty, fraternity. Haiti emerged the leading global symbol of black freedom, resilient and respected, but covered in the ash of French retribution. To France, we say, rise to your responsibility. The Dutch denies, yet we know that they were forced to develop the trade in enchained African bodies as a modern global corporate enterprise. To the Dutch, we say, rise to your responsibility. Spain denies, yet we know that the Spanish were first conceptualized and practiced the idea that African enslavement should follow the genocide they imposed upon the natives of these Americas. Norway and Denmark, not to be left behind, joined in and prospered, as did the royals of Russia and the aristocracy of Austria, who were as financially enriched as the beyond-the-scenes slave-investing Swiss and Swedes. All of Western Europe, combined with their American colonies, created the cradle of Western financial modernization based upon the most lucrative sustainable investment of all times, the enchained enslaved African body as commercial property. The silence of the enslaving nations and their political allies must be broken and their denials ended. Then, and only then, will African descendants breathe freely the air of life and justice.
Mr. President, I wish on behalf the transglobal slave trade, which made more than a criminal movement of enchained African bodies. It was a transfer of African cosmology and epistemologies to slavering societies that were enriched by African minds and hands. The violent recruitment of enchained bodies also enabled the mobilization and intellectual and cultural resources to give rise to the West as a recipient of Africa's best. In this decade, resources must be provided. UNESCO, NGOs, universities, museums, to research and discuss these traditions of labor and intellectual exploitation, and illustrate the true role of Africans in the making of modernity. Finally, there's an imperative of reparative justice. Dr. Martin Luther King, in his ironic "I Have a Dream" speech, said the following: "I have come to our nation's capital to cash a check. America has given the Negro people a bad check, which has come back marked insufficient funds. Mr. President, I have been taught to rehearse and recant the dream. Part of this powerful message, the modernity, and to forget or ignore the reparative justice plea. Today, I call upon the world to take notice that Dr. King's reparative justice claim is alive as powerful as his dream."
In the name of Toussaint, Mandela, Harriet Tubman, Malcolm, and Dr. King, and Maya Angelou, let us all say, in this decade, the demand for reparatory justice will be taken through every diplomatic door or taken down the corridors of every court. We are survivors of the African Holocaust. Into these Americans were dragged in chains some 12 million enslaved ancestors. At the end of the barbarity, only 6 million had survived. Survivors have a right to reparatory justice. The powerful have no right to deprive them. Let us all then raise our hands in opposition to the violence that denies us the right to breathe and to have justice. Let us all resolve to make descent this
decade
decade as the door to a century that must witness the triumph of our collective and shared conception of humanity at its best. Let us resolve furthermore to clean up the mess left by slavery and colonization and move on as one humanity in peace and with love. The words there of Professor Hilary Beckles, the advocate for reparations and for justice for African people in the English-speaking Caribbean and other parts of the diaspora. He was addressing the United Nations General Assembly on the issue of reparations and linking it to the recently declared International Decade of the People of African Descent. Here with me tonight on the program, reciting, as we would say in Guyana, those words of Professor Beckles were Miss Eve Blackman. Some of you would know Miss Blackman as part of the leadership of Channel 9, a very important institution, of course. And so that makes her a very important instrument as we seek in this country our own reparatory justice at the local level and as we try to extend it at the larger global level. Dr. Margaret Garvey, member of Cuffy250, and Mr. Royston Peters, the chairman of Cuffy250. Just in case you're joining us and you're wondering which program you're looking at, it's African Drums, the program of Cuffy250, or every Sunday night here at 8 o'clock. And what we try to do on this program is to educate, to engage in a process of exchange of ideas, and engage in the process of trying to collectively lift ourselves by pointing to our own glories and pointing to our own deficiencies, but bringing them together so that we as an African people would stand up shoulder to shoulder with our sisters and brothers in Guyana and the rest of the Caribbean and say that we are owners. We are owners of this space also. We are dwellers of this space also. And as Professor Rex Nettleford would say, we are part of those who tenant this holy space here. Sisters and brothers, let's, you've read the words of Professor Hilary Beckles, and I think what he has done in this piece here is to really collapse all the pieces of not only our own argument for reparations, but also I think what he brings to bear here is our own testimony of our right to be. We are at the dawn of the 21st century, and once again humanity struggles to come to terms with the legacies of the crimes committed against its African family. Aspects of these legacies are as alive today as they were 2 centuries ago. Everywhere that African enchainment and enslavement became the basis of societies and economies, their descendants today cannot assume the human right to breathe the air of freedom and justice. I think those are very telling words because it speaks to our own crusade, if you will, here among African Guyanese in this community. Because often when we speak about slavery, they would like us to talk about it as an ancient phenomenon. And I think what Professor Beckles here is bringing slavery into the present and really saying that the present is really a reflection of all of that experience. I'll start with you, Dr. Garvey. Your own reflections on those words there.
First of all, I think that it's just amazing that it has taken this long for this issue to be established in this way, that a resolution has been passed by the United Nations to bring this issue to the forefront. It was, as I know a little bit about the process of how they arrived at this point, and it was not an easy process. I think beginning way back in 1997, certainly in 2001 with the resolution, the Durban resolution that established the aspects of outrage against discrimination and racism that's being enacted against people of African descent. And I know throughout the 2000, 2005, 2007, this debate went on. Actually, in October of this year, when the resolution was first brought to the floor of the United Nations, there were actually 9 dissenting nations, and I think some who abstained. But the majority, 121, I think, supported the resolution. So one of the things that I want people to understand is that this has not been an easy process, and there have been a lot of African people, Pan-Africanists, involved in the struggle to bring this resolution to the table and to get it passed. And because it has not been an easy process, we need to take it seriously, we need to honor it, and we need to pursue the steps that we have to pursue here in Guyana to make sure that this resolution, the terms in the resolution that have been outlined are actually brought to the table, that we hold our government to task in terms of having these perceptions that have been put out by the United Nations acted upon.
Eve, your own reflection on Professor Beckler's really using the broad brush of history to link the past to the present and really talking about how that determines our future.
Yes, it's interesting because it seems as though time has stood still. We feel that we are free and we can pursue our dreams and our visions like any other, but that seems to be not so. We're dealt with an uneven playing field to conduct a business as an African person. We do not have the same equal rights as other people. We experience that today. And that, as far as I'm concerned, is not even a step away from slavery. That is a form of enslavement.
Mm-hmm. Bob Marley said 400 years, no chains around my feet, but I'm still not free. Royston?
You know, when I listen to the words recited earlier, and I look at what exists locally in Guyana, I can't help but think that there must be some blueprint somewhere that these guys who are currently managing this country have gotten as a handover from colonial times. Because there seems to be nothing different in the general conduct, in the whole political demonstration, display, and the total governance and management of Africans in this country today as it was back in the time of slavery. It may seem as though things would have changed some bit, but in the actual demonstration and delivery of governance, it's all the same. Mm-hmm. And so for me, even though then, and as Bob Marley said, the chains have been removed from the hands and feet, I think that the administrators are still disseminating and delivering to us the real first-hand blow that masters would have offered.
Yes, and it's the institutionalization. Yeah. As Eve said, you know, it's as if time has stood still, because what you create is an institution that outlives slavery. Yep. Someone talked about slavery without slaves, and I think that's the point you're really driving at there. Bob Marley, and we go to him again, you know, turned the speech given by Haile Selassie before this very United Nations into song, in the song War, and he was saying, until this inhumanity of man over man ends, there will always be war. And in the sense, pointing that until, as a world, we deal with the legacies of enslavement, there will really not be peace in the world. It would be a contrived peace. And I think Professor Breckles brings us out here. I think, Margaret, you made a very important point that it's not easy. And I wish to dwell on that for a little while. The Calypsonian Black Stallion, as the song say, not easy. He said, you know, black man must realize that everything they get don't come easy. When we wanted independence, we had to go to England with a piece of paper for women to tell we that we're free. And one of the little known calypsos, but really bringing it together here. And part of what we want, and I'm speaking to the audience, I'm speaking especially to you, if young people are in the audience looking, is that you've got to understand, yeah, things have changed. You are not living in the same reality day to day as your mother and father, your grandmother and grandfather. But really, as Royston said, the blueprint is still there. It's somewhat hidden from you. And so you have got to understand that we are all of our history. The beautiful things of our history are all of that. But the ugly things about our history, the ugly things done to us, we're also part of that. And so as we look at our present reality, we've got to understand that it's really linked inextricably to our own past experience. So I know some of you all young people tend to be impatient. Slavery gone a long time ago. We wish to say that, yeah, legal slavery ended in 1838 in Guyana and the English-speaking Caribbean. But the process that underpinned the slavery institution is still here with us today. African people in this country and some of our brothers and sisters of other ethnic groups are still used as chattel. In this country. Our bodies are still used as property. Our bodies are still used as a means of enriching others. And that was the process of slavery. The second part, Professor Beckles talk about the steadfast refusal of the European nations to acknowledge their debt. What shocked us, another Calypsonian called My Grandfather's Back Pay, right? And that refusal obviously has to be grounded in something. As Dr. King was quoted here as saying, you know, African people bring a check to you. They come to the Bank of Justice and they send back and say insufficient funds. There must be something, I think, and I think Professor Beckles is suggesting here, there's something that somebody stands to lose if African people gets reparations. Eve, let me start with you on that.
Well, that I would love to see that being defined, because for whatever reasons we do not know, but time will tell. Time always brings out the reasons for people behaving like that. These are people who have imposed their morality on us in many ways. And here we watch the double standards. When we show them, when they're pointed out, we show them where things went wrong, and they refuse to, or they're making a problem, creating a problem in responding in a manner that they have always suggested you should deal with these matters.
Mm-hmm. Margaret?
Well, worldwide, in terms of the European powers who, you know, owe us reparations, as well as in terms of what's going on in Guyana, it's the economic capitalist conglomerates that they have established that they feel threatened, that is threatened if they were to look precisely at what they owe us. They're terribly afraid, absolutely, that there will be an unraveling of their economic power, because reparations for us means that we can then begin to control our economic destinies and consequently our political and social and destinies in all spheres. And so obviously it's a threat to them. It's a threat that they will be dismantled. Yes.
Royston?
Well, despite the fact of economics, there are other elements that reparations would really mean to us as a people. I think in terms of education in the first instance, and I think in terms of our own sense of development of our people. Information sharing as another one. Those are fundamentals that we need to have if we're to lift ourselves as a people and move forward. But on the question of finances, I know that would have been Europe, Britain for that matter, some years ago would have paid themselves in excess of $20 million as compensation for the loss of our slave labor when slavery would have ended. So if they could have been beneficiaries of reparations as a result of losing our labor, why not then the actual persons who would have suffered, or the descendants of slaves, or persons who would have endured slavery, why then should we be able to benefit as well?
Yeah.
And so it's a process that would not be an easy one. And I know that there is lots of work being done to justify various forms of claims. I think only some months ago in Antigua, some of those information would have been shared with the Caribbean Reparations Committee. And so work has been done to ensure that information is had to validate and support the claims they make, especially in Guyana. The other countries perhaps would have a little easier time, but I think in Guyana's case, lots of records would have been lost and so on. So we're now trying to retrieve those, put them together, and basically there is simply no escaping.
In case you're just joining us, you're looking at the African Drums. I'm David Hinds, sitting in for LC Harry. And tonight we're discussing a range of issues around the recent United Nations declaration of the decade of the descendants of the Africans. We had an international year for the descendants of Africa, and now we have a decade. And we have been feeding off, if you will, the words of Professor Hilary Beckles, Barbadian and Caribbean scholar and advocate of reparations, who addressed the United Nations General Assembly recently, drawing to their attention the issues and the problems associated with retrieving our own justice in this world. And we were recently, well, just before I did the ID, really talking about why is it that Europe continues to be in denial. The European countries continue to try to walk softly around this issue of reparations. And Sister Margaret here talked about how capitalism itself was part of what slavery is about. And in his speech, Professor Hilary Beckles made constant reference to what is called modernity, a big word they use in academic circles. But what he's getting at is what we know what we come to know as the so-called Industrial Revolution in Europe, which move Europe from a kind of backward feudal kind of economic system to a more modern system. That's what they mean by modernity. And you know, the African labor was at the center of modernity. That here in the Caribbean, where sugar was the basis upon which European wealth was built. Most of that sugar was grown here in the Caribbean, and black slave labor was used. When cotton became king, 80% of the cotton that the world used was was developed in the United States of America, black labor. We go to Brazil, which was one of the largest producers of sugar. We go to Haiti, one of the largest producers of sugar, creating the wealth for France. Then when the Haitian Revolution happened, Cuba then became the largest producer of sugar, really making Spain be what it was. And we can go through history and show how our people, their sweat and their blood, created what we today call European wealth and American wealth. Just imagine you have a business and you don't have to pay workers. You make a killing. That's where the American dream was born. Because in the 1830s and the 1840s, they took away native Indian land and gave them to poor whites because you had to own land, you had to own property in order to vote. So in order to make poor white people vote, you had to give them property. So they took away the native Indian land and gave them to the poor whites. It's what's called, they passed a law in the United States Congress. It's called the Indian Removal Act. A law in the United States says, take the native Indian land, give it to poor whites, and then chase the Indians west in what became known as the Trail of Tears. Now you got free land, and then you got free labor. And in 2 turnover of cotton, you became a millionaire. 2-3 turnover, and that's where the American dream came from. So the point here is that what they call today modernity, what they call this wealth, at the center of that is free black labor. And so part of our own underdevelopment, black people, wherever we are, Brazil, Guyana, Trinidad, Barbados, even Africa itself, you wonder why our lot is like this. And it is not because we are stupid. It is not because we are lazy, as they try to tell us. It is because in the order of things, societies develop, and wealth is not just money you earn. Wealth is old money, excess money that you had, that you invest and turn it over, and then you pass it on to your children and your grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And what they've passed on to us is not wealth. Because as Sparrow said, when slavery ended, you put us out on the street, I had no clothes, I had no particular ambition, and all I had was my song and my dance to keep me happy, my culture that I created. And so therefore, yes, whereas other people were able to multiply wealth, we multiplied underdevelopment, as Walter Rodney would have said in how Europe underdeveloped Africa, making the case that Europe became developed because Africa and the African diaspora became underdeveloped. Let's talk a little here about our own reflections, and this program is a program of reflections. Our own reflections on what we in Guyana would like to use this decade of the Africans, what we would like to do here in Guyana. And I say this, I was in church this morning. Yes, I just got to church too. I was in church this morning, and one of the church elders pulled me aside and said, David, look around the church. There are hardly young people in church. There are a few young women. Where are the young people? And she pleaded with me to spend some of my big voice talking to our young people about what we are losing. That the young people are not in church, not so much because of the church, but the church itself is part of the larger society, that the church recruits young people. And I reflected on this international decade, and perhaps, we should focus on saving what is left there among our young people, because they are the future. But that's just what I want to throw out. What are some of the things you all think that we should concentrate on, we should use this decade to highlight and to work on? I'll start with you, Eve.
The young people are our future, and we would hope that they would go into their lives, into adulthood, with less of the burdens that we have to face today. Some justice would be wonderful, and fairness to Africans' descendants in this decade.
And so you think we should spend some time working with the young people,
Definitely.
freeing them of what you call the burden. And I think that is important, because a lot of the young people don't realize the burden they carry around, right? But we who understand that historical burden that they're carrying on their shoulders, I think we need to do as we are doing here, reaching out in word, but also as Cuffy250 does, reach out in deed as we go into the communities and try to do that. So certainly I do agree with you that, reaching the young people and trying to pull them back from the edge.
From the edge.
Pull them back from the edge, because that's where I think most of them are at the moment, through no fault of theirs, but again, the legacy of slavery. Margaret?
Well, I think if there's a subtext or a caveat to be added to the United Nations Declaration for this decade of African descended people, it should be something that says Africans promoting their own self-identity, their own individualism. I think African descended people need, well, we have to a certain extent, but during this decade, we definitely need to find more time to be introspective, to go into ourselves and work towards defining and identifying who we are. We have not spent enough time, since the end of slavery, certainly in Guyana, since the beginning of the era of independence, in terms of fostering our own self-definition. We're always looking to other people to define who we are. We need to just take, for example, what we call ourselves. We're still fighting over whether we're Guyanese or African Guyanese. Obviously, we're in Guyana. We're defined absolutely by our environment, but giving ourselves the African prefix is definitely a way to honor our past. We understand that we're not African, but we understand that much of our heritage and our culture comes from Africa. We need to sit down and decide what that is and how we can use the positive aspects of it to promote our own lives, to become strong and healthy. We're not yet strong and healthy. We're fractured, segmented. Of course, we lack unity among ourselves, and that's something we need to work on. I talk about becoming strong and the environment. We become strong in terms of accessing the resources and the features of nature in our own environment. We're still looking towards outer forces, outer sources to define who we are. I looked at our Christmas celebrations, and of course, we celebrate Christmas, those of us who are Christians, but I'm wondering why it is we can't find resources for our own environment to express our religion and express our ideas about Christmas. There's so many other areas that we should begin to look at in terms of grounding ourselves in this society. We're not we're here, we're in Guyana, we're Guyanese, we understand that. The way we dress, what we eat, our culture, how we relate to each other, all these things define who we are as Guyanese. We have to sit down and consciously reflect on these things, introspect on these things, teach our children about them. We cannot make progress, and people will always continue to exploit and oppress us if we are not strong in our own right. And we cannot make progress until we develop this strong grounding and in terms of forging our own idea. I keep insisting on the environment. When I look at television, I see so much that is totally out of context in terms of who we are, and this whole idea of you know, forging who we are in terms of our natural state. And so I think that we need to take the United Nations Declaration and run with it in terms of our own individuality. Now, we understand that there have been responsibilities, according to the Declaration, put on governments and various economic forces in our society to implement the plans. And I urge everyone to go to the website, the United Nations Declaration related to the Decade of Africans, Descended People, and look at the activities that have been listed that governments have been called upon to support this declaration. And as I said earlier, to decide what we need to do to have our governments, to hold our governments to task. But the other side of it is that individually and in our groups and in our communities, we need to take hold of ourselves and forge a stronger identity in terms of who we are here and now.
And the point you made there, Dr. Garvey, about us not being afforded a time and space after slavery, after 400 years of the most horrendous experience in human history, to reflect on that and to talk among ourselves, has had the kind of effect that it has had. We came out of slavery, and we began that reflection when we started our village movement and so on, but that was interrupted as we had to face the new onslaught of colonialism. And then colonialism came to an end, and we thought that we were about to build a nation, calling on all our energies. The neo-colonial forces, today they call it globalization, descended on us. And so we've never had that time and space to really sit down as a people and to grapple with the consequences of that experience. And we're paying for it. And perhaps, as I hear you say, in this decade, we should, whatever we do, find some time to ground. And I like the old the image of the grounding, to ground with our people and to talk about our own experiences and how we can heal ourselves and so on and so, because there's a lot of healing that has to be done. In case you're just joining us, this is African Drums. I'm David Hinds, and tonight we're talking about the international decade that has been declared by the United Nations, the Decade of People of African Descent. And we're talking about what that means for us in Guyana, what it means for us in the rest of the African diaspora. And ultimately, as Professor Hilary Beckles, whose words we used earlier in the program, said, we are at the crossroads. Rex Netherford would say, we are always at the crossroads, given our experience. So it's yet another crossroad. CLR James says, beyond the boundary, we have to constantly be moving beyond the boundary. And as Jimmy Cliff said, many rivers to cross. So one more river. And I'm calling on all of these icons of the Caribbean experience in order to inform our own expression here about how serious this business about our African self and selfhood is. Royston Peters, the chairman of Cuffy250, what would you like to see us do in this decade?
I thank you for that intro, because really the preamble you offered is in essence one of the more fundamental challenges we have to face with. Coming out of slavery in 1838, we would have been one people on this land. And the whole dynamics would have changed after that, and now we have all sorts to deal with. But more fundamental to that is the fact that, and you asked earlier for us to reach out and try to find a way to bond and build. And we find that, incidentally, one of the replacements used by colonial masters after freeing the shackles from their hands and feet would have been the element of Christianity to wrap you up and tie you up and so on. Though I understand the challenge we face, and I respect every struggle we would have gone through, it is not easy for us to bridge that gap. I'm going to tell you this. 2 days ago, I had a chat with a woman from West Berbice. And I said, are you part, because I was trying to do an extension of our own events and activities, are you part of a African cultural organization, African organization? Because she looked real cultural. And she said, I'm 7 days. And so I quickly reclined because I understood what I meant. And so I say that to suggest that in a lot of cases, it is a continuous and perhaps Herculean task for us to seek to do things from a cultural perspective and deal with the more religious things that of the world, especially here in Guyana. What I would like perhaps to have us look at is what we would like to address as a more global way of dealing with things. And it has some resemblance to what Dr. David mentioned a while ago, where we look at it from the perspective of universal consciousness. In that way, if you try to simulate yourself into the world and see how things fit in to the element of your health, your own knowledge, your own education, your own growth, your own development, without dependency on anybody, anything, anywhere, you just seek to connect with your own heritage, your forefathers, your foreparents, and you dwell through that realm. You then seek to have a better footage and perhaps a firmer cleave to what you need to have to move yourself forward. But the challenge there is, how do I do that when I have to trust and obey and believe and so on and so on and so forth? It's a challenge for us. It's a challenge. Mm-hmm. It's not a walkover. The other thing I would like to have us look at is, and that's baseline. It's our foods. It may take like a simple thing, because and it perhaps doesn't even need to be focused on. But when you understand what our composition really is and how we link to the universe, you then appreciate the fact that except we can feed ourselves adequately, we can respect the things we eat, respect the soil from which it grows and all of that, we would not be able to create the kind of blend and bonding to make ourselves one universal people, to do the things we need to do to bring ourselves to the level at which we need to be to advance in life. And when I mentioned that, I reflected on our one brother, U.C. Guyana, who long time ago I said to him, I would like to be like you one day. And he said, when you're ready, let me know. And that was fundamental, because I thought I was ready, but he saw my unpreparedness, and so I would have journeyed ever since then. And so I say that the element I spoke to that food issue because it is not in any way diverse or divorced from our livelihood, our coexistence, and our relationship to the soil that gives us the growth and development. And let me just hasten to say this, that is also twin to our health, because I'm looking at food security and food safety, and the health is tied into that. Some years ago we thought that life expectancy here in Guyana was 70. It's no longer so. We have not officially said that. When you look at the amount of persons that are coming down with cancers primarily, we understand that something is wrong. There is something in our foods that is wrong, You have to find it and resolve it.
That's the voice there of Mr. Royston Peters, the chairman of Cuffy250. And they're telling me that the time is up. How quickly an hour goes. Well, I want to thank my panel, Mr. Peters, Royston Peters. I want to thank Dr. Margaret Garvey. And I want to thank Miss Eve Blackman. In case you all were wondering who is Eve Blackman, this person who's in charge of Channel 9. Well, here you have her right here on Channel 9 screen. I think we've started a discussion here tonight that needs broadening, and that we in Cuffy250 intend to revisit this issue and to really expand on some of the small points that we made here tonight as we continue our own program, our own journey into the communities in Guyana, the African Guyanese community. I want to say that we may be critical at times, but we love you. We love you, black people. We want you to love yourself. Because if you don't love yourself, then other people can't love you. If you don't love yourself, then your eyes can't be clean to see when those who are trying to trick you. Bob Marley said, I don't want my people to be contrary. I don't want my people to be tricked by mercenaries. They got mercenaries trying to trick you all. I'm saying to you all, we got clean the eyes. And what we're going to be doing here and what we continue to do in Cuffy250 is help to clean our own eyes so that we can see clearly. We can see clearly what we have to do, and we can see clearly those who stand in our way as we do it. There's no contradiction, as Dr. Garvey says, between being an African and a Guyanese. Before there was a Guyana, there were Africans who were brought across the Middle Passage and whose blood and bodies and bones lie at the bottom of the ocean, and whose bodies and bones are buried here in Guyana. And so, yes, we are Guyanese, but we're also African. Until the next time, this is David Hinds thanking you for tuning in to yet another edition of African Drums. Remember, when the drums begin to roll, it means that our people are on the move. Good night.